Welcome back, everybody, here to Chase Sports News. I am your host, Chase Coburn. We're previewing the MAAC 2025-26 basketball season here on Chase Sports News. No one better to do so than with the MAAC Commissioner, Travis Tellitocci. Travis, thank you for taking the time today. I appreciate it.
No problem. Appreciate being with you, Chase.
I'm so glad you're able to take the time. Obviously, just a week away from the start of the college basketball season. I mean, it's that time of year, right? It's one of the best.
Hard to believe that the end of this week is November. Obviously, the fall flew by, so excited for basketball season to start. I know a lot of people look forward to this time of year, so we're ready.
We are ready. It's going to be a really exciting season on both the men's and the women's side. And the MAAC conference in general, you look back on what was a very successful 2024-25 season, just in terms of viewership, how the teams played. Really, the key change from last year was the fact that you added Sacred Heart and Merrimack into the conference to make 13 teams, and that kind of readjusted the whole MAAC tournament playoff, essentially, where three teams were absent. Did you like how that ended up going and how it maybe improved the regular season competitiveness in those final weeks?
Yeah, obviously, Merrimack and Sacred Heart, great additions to the league. Was happy to get them going last year for their first season in the MAAC. We made the decision to go from a tournament that had all comers, which would have been 13, down to 10. That's the first time in the conference's history that we didn't take all of the teams. And I was really pleased with how it turned out. Obviously, you never know until you live it the first time, but I think what it really did was create excitement down the stretch of the regular season. Not only were teams fighting to get into the field, but obviously for seeding as well. So I thought it just brought a new level of excitement to the basketball season, which I think then carried over to the tournament as well in Atlantic City. So very happy with the way that things went last year, and obviously looking forward to it again this year as well.
I want to talk about the MAAC tournament because I was there last year and it was obviously so electric, as it usually is in Atlantic City at the Jim Whalen Boardwalk Hall. I do know, though, that the extension that the MAAC did sign, or the contract, I should say, with Atlantic City and the Boardwalk Hall, does run out after this year. What's maybe in the makings post 2026? Can you kind of just speak to that and maybe what the future of the MAAC basketball championships hold?
Yeah, so to your point, we're in the last year of our contract at Boardwalk Hall in Atlantic City. We are in the RFP process. The RFP went out to a number of arenas throughout the Northeast. So that process is fully underway. We'll take this fall and probably early into the winter to evaluate those bids. That will get vetted through our Committee on Athletic Administration, which is our athletic directors and senior women administrators. They'll vet and be the first to look at the proposals from the cities that submitted a bid. And then they'll make a recommendation, and that recommendation will go forward to our Council of Presidents, who will have the ultimate vote on where we would end up for 27, 28, 29. Obviously looking for a partner that is able to host for the next 3 years. I think as we're looking to the future of this event, we want a partnership and making sure that this is not just a one-off scenario where we're going to different venues each year. So that's really important to us, and just excited to see the process play out as bids start to come back here probably in the next few weeks. We'll evaluate those and see where we're at.
Any chance Atlantic City is again the host post 2026?
Yeah, we had our meetings in June at the end of the year up at the Sagamore Resort in Lake George, and obviously had time to spend with our both men's and women's basketball coaches and talk to them about the tournament and, what went well, what didn't, what needs to be changed for the future. So we always have that opportunity to debrief with them. And I will tell you that a lot of positive feedback on Atlantic City. Again, I think there was a different kind of energy this year. And you mentioned you were there, and it felt different this year than the year before for me. Obviously, the first year was my first year in the commissioner's chair, but I thought last year felt different. And again, great feedback from our coaches. So that's something that we carry forward as well to our athletic directors and SWAs as we're making those decisions as well. But Atlantic City, obviously, I think will be in the running as we go forward, looking at a new location again.
I also know that one of the other big, contracts and announcements that MAAC basketball did make was that contract with ESPN for the MAAC tournament. That's going to kind of shift it to more like the first weekends of the tournaments, as opposed to kind of that final weekend before the NCAA tournament. When the brackets are picked and all that. And I know that ESPN now signed a contract supposed to improve, the visibility of the conference. What really does the future of kind of televised MAAC basketball hold? And maybe that's a partnership with ESPN as well.
ESPN has obviously evolved over the years. You'll remember back to the days of ESPN3, which are now gone, and that is all encompassing under ESPN Plus. And now with their direct to consumer service, obviously, I don't think people are consuming television in the same way that they might have even 3 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. So very happy with that partnership for that reason, that you don't necessarily need a cable subscription. You can do everything right from your phone and have access like never before. Obviously, ESPN Plus is where most of our games will be streamed over the basketball season. But I think, again, in that agreement, we were looking for a partner that not only brings great visibility to the league, but a branding opportunity as well. ESPN has been an outstanding partner for us over the years. I think the tournament shifting back will be a great thing for the visibility of the conference. We were just lost where we were on that Saturday night. We were going up against 13 other conference tournaments on the men's side and about 9 or 10 on the women's side. So when you're going directly up against the Big East tournament, the SEC, the ACC, the Big 12, not really a spot that you want to be in from a visibility standpoint. And we were on ESPNU. So this gets us back to earlier in the week on Tuesday night for the men, on Monday for the women, and on the men gives us that slot in prime time on ESPN or ESPN2. And then hopefully for the women, we're still going through that as well. A slot on either ESPNU or ESPN Plus. It gives the women's championship a standalone game, which they really haven't had much of in the past. So I'm really excited as well that our tournament's going to fall. The majority of our tournament's going to fall over the weekend. So we start on Thursday. Semifinals will be Sunday. So you've got Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for the majority of our tournament. And then obviously, as we said, the championships on Monday and Tuesday. So that will hopefully help from a fan perspective. And it gives us time to celebrate our champions. Those that win on Monday and Tuesday night have the whole week now leading up to Selection Sunday to promote that. Before, we had less than 24 hours to do that.
Right. I know last year when I was there in Mount St. Mary's and Fairfield punched their tickets to the NCAA tournament, they were fighting for other teams in the MAAC to get in. It just felt like a very quick process. You're right. Now the MAAC does get that standalone game, and I think it is going to be great for the conference. And I think we got to talk about how the game is changing in a sense, right? And I'll kind of let you, really try to grasp why it is or how it is changing exactly. But we're talking about the transfer portal. We're talking about NIL. How is the MAAC going to try to benefit from this new landscape of college basketball that we now know of?
We've tried to be very strategic in that as the landscape has changed. One of the things when I first started this position was how do we help our schools with NIL? And that has now evolved into revenue share since the House settlement has been approved. One of the things that we did was we formed a partnership with an NIL consultant, Accelerate Sport Ventures, who has been extremely helpful in talking to our basketball coaches, our athletic directors, our SWAs, our presidents. They come to our meetings, have the opportunity to brief our coaches on the current landscape, what to look for, roster management. When do you need to start building those rosters, getting ahead? So it was really an attempt on our part to help our schools with more expertise from that landscape. We've had multiple conversations with our athletic directors and presidents about what investing looks like. We say that basketball is a priority in this league, but what does that really mean? And we've done a great job of defining what that means and, putting things into place as we go forward that hopefully position ourselves to remain competitive. I was very pleased this year that we were able to retain more talent. I think last year we were dead last in the retention category. which is tough. But this year, I saw a graphic that said we were third. And when you look around at the tip-off event in Atlantic City, you see familiar faces on both the men's and women's side, which is good. And that's what we want. Obviously, it gets harder and harder for coaches to build rosters when our student athletes are getting poached from other levels. So it's a challenge that's not going to go away by any means. So we just have to be strategic and at the forefront of that landscape and evolve as the landscape evolves too.
Right.
We can't do things the way that we've always done them and expect better results.
I think what's also interesting, though, is you mentioned how you want the retention to be high and how you want players to stay in the conference, obviously just to build a brand and to make lives easier for coaches and schools, athletic directors, et cetera. But take a guy like Walter Clayton as an example, and there are so many more that go from the MAAC and then jump and kind of use it as a launching pad into power conferences and then find success and are playing big games in big conferences. Do you almost like when that happens too, as kind of a way to promote the conference and say, hey, freshmen, you want a way to get to the top, come to the MAAC?
It's a catch-22, right?
Right.
Obviously, you would love a player like Walter Clayton Jr. At Iona for a few more years, but yes, great to see the success, and it's something that I think we can promote not only as a conference but our member institutions on the recruiting trail as well. I think that was really the strength of the league over the years of coaches finding talent, diamonds in the rough, if you will, and developing them over a 4-year period, which, as we know, is a lot more difficult, now in this current landscape. I think the other thing too, which our schools have to work at and is, I know, can be frustrating, is from a fan standpoint. You
Yeah.
used to be able to follow a player's journey from freshman year to senior year and celebrate them on senior day. That's not necessarily the case anymore as well. So, I'm a believer in the transfer portal giveth and also taketh. So I think you've got to use it to your advantage, even though it might be a disadvantage at times as well.
You mentioned that the retention was pretty much dead last going into last season, but going into this year, it's one of the highest. Why the such disparity? How come more players try to stay in the MAAC this year?
It's a great question. I think it's not probably just one thing that you can pinpoint to. I would say from a revenue share standpoint, we had 10 of our 13 schools opt into the house settlement, which shows that I think you've got programs that are committed to changing with this evolving landscape, investing in student athletes and additional benefits. So I think obviously that definitely helps as part of trying to retain talent. I also think you have great stories and situations like you do at Quinnipiac when you've got the player of the year who stays at the institution because he's felt comfortable there. And they've really done a good job making sure that his experience has been a great one during his tenure. So I know that story isn't always going to be the case, but I think it is a testament to our institutions and what they're doing, not only on the basketball court and investing, but off the court as well. I think people tend to forget that piece of it too, that they are still students, they still go to class, they still graduate, which is really the ultimate goal. So I think those things combined, and there's many factors out there. I don't think there's one silver bullet, but I think when you combine those different efforts, it does lead to better retention.
I had a conversation with Jerry McNamara of Siena earlier today, and he was talking about how one of the things he doesn't like with this new landscape that continues to evolve is he sees these players going, 4 schools in 4 years, 5 schools in 5 years, even now with that extra year of eligibility, and they have no college affiliation. Some of the credits don't transfer over. You're not getting the degree you hoped or a degree even. How is the MAAC trying to help their players and help their schools make sure that, academics are also a huge part of the equation and making sure that they do graduate with degrees and things along those lines?
Well, and I know every conference says this, that we are both academic and athletic focused, but I do think in the MAAC, it truly reigns true that it's not just about athletics at our campuses. Academics are an important component, and being a MAAC student athlete is challenging. Our schools obviously have good academic reputations. So, as I mentioned in the previous question, the goal in this all, in my opinion, is graduation. At the end of the day, that our jobs as administrators on our campuses and with support from the conference office is to help student athletes get degrees. Less than, I think sometimes we get caught up in all of the money and the NIL and the talk, but really less than 2%, maybe even less than that, will go pro, in the NBA or NFL or Major League Baseball. So at the end of the day, I think it's really incumbent on all of us to make sure that we're setting our student athletes up for success after basketball. And that comes with getting a degree first and foremost. So, we've got a lot of resources in place on our campuses to make sure that student athletes are, in a good spot from an academic standpoint. And that's just a testament to, I think, our core mission and values that I think it's what helps set us apart from maybe some of the other conferences as well.
I want to touch on real quick, some of the talent that the MAAC is going to be, having now in its conference. Obviously they're going to lose people from the transfer portal. You're also going to gain people from the transfer portal as well, who are going to use the MAAC as a step forward and, continuing to try to climb up that ladder in a sense. Do you think in terms of freshmen and sophomores, you've heard reports to the fact that power schools are not trying to take on as many freshmen and sophomores to just ride the bench and transfer the next year. Do you think you're going to start to see a lot of high level, really talented freshmen come to the MAAC, and all of a sudden the MAAC now has some of the best players in the country right at its fingertips?
Well, I think it's a good point. And the age old line is, what the best thing about freshmen is they become sophomores, right? That they
Right.
learn in that first year and evolve. And that's where I think the hard thing in this whole landscape is you don't necessarily have that runway that you might have had before, where a freshman is getting a good experience and learns throughout the year, and then he or she is gone. So that's what we're obviously trying to prevent. And I think you saw some cases of that this year with a player like Gavin Doty at Siena who decided to stick around, and those stories are great. And I think, freshmen, obviously, there's a lot of talent out there. So I think from a recruiting standpoint, that comes back to how coaches are being strategic in terms of using the transfer portal, recruiting traditional high school freshmen, and how that fills out your roster. It is not lost on me that is a completely difficult challenge from a recruiting standpoint by coaches as we go forward. And I think it's trying to strike that balance, right? Of how do you maybe get some veterans out of the transfer portal that mesh with some of those freshmen that can help guide them, throughout the year. That's the balance that I think every coach is trying to achieve. And retaining is obviously hard when you've got players of the year, first teamers, second teamers, third teamers, who I'm sure it's some assistant's job at the higher levels just to look at each of our conferences, postseason awards, and that is obviously a great distinction for our student athletes, but it also opens the door to maybe some schools looking to obtain that talent as they go along.
We've talked about roster retention a ton because it is so important and it's so hard to retain talent in the new landscape of college basketball. Obviously, we'll see how the season plays out, but in terms of the preseason coaches poll that the MAAC recently did release with their media day and everything, when the coaches did vote on the preseason poll, the top three teams were Quinnipiac, Siena, and Sacred Heart. And people can make an argument those are the teams retaining a lot of their star players. You mentioned Monroe with Quinnipiac, Justice Schultz with Siena, and then just a ton of really talented players sticking with Anthony, Latina, and Sacred Heart. So I think eventually the blueprint's going to be set of, you're able to retain players and you're going to find a ton of success. I do want to talk about some of the teams that have been really dominant in this conference. And I think it's interesting how there's always the topic of parity in sports. On the women's side, you've sort of had a mini dynasty over the past half decade with Fairfield U. On the men's side, since the COVID-19 pandemic, the tournament has pretty much been wide open to anybody. So obviously parity is something that, conferences want to have. They want to have more teams competing in the mix. But is it sometimes better from a recognition standpoint to have a team like Fairfield U, as an example, that's, and representing the MAAC every year in the tournament and is nationally ranked? Kind of what do you feel about parity in terms of how it helps recognition and how it helps the conference?
Yeah, I think parity is a good thing. And again, I think it's finding that balance. On the men's side, to your point, I thought last year was really wide open. And as we look even at scheduling and playing an unbalanced schedule, I think it's something that's very hard to predict, even going as far as TV matchups for ESPNU. When you've got wild card, it's really hard to sit here in October and try to predict who's going to be good and what those television matchups will look like, what those standings will look like, and even from a scheduling standpoint. So I think the parity is probably better than ever on the men's side. I think, to your point, for the women, Fairfield and Quinnipiac have been pretty dominant over the last few years here. I think back to the Marist years on the women's side, where that was a 10-year run by Coach Georges. And I think that has benefits as well as getting notoriety out there for not only the institution, but the conference as well. So not to say that that's a bad thing by any means. I think both have their pros and cons. And from the conference office standpoint, I think our job is just to try to promote both, right? And it's great to have a team nationally ranked, which Fairfield was the year before. So those are things that we obviously celebrate, and huge accomplishments for schools at our level to be in the top 25 AP poll.
And I mean, what does it mean as well? I know we saw, CBS Sports just wrote an article about some of the players to look out for. Amari Monroe was on that list in terms of all players in the entire country. The Mid-Major Player of the Year award, Katie Lamoureux and Megan Anderson are going to be right there for Fairfield. So it feels like it's also an opportunity where you have some of these top teams and some of the top players, and they're going to get national recognition for the conference as well.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously great for the institution from a recruiting standpoint and what Carly has done at Fairfield. And again, being able to retain talent. And I would even take that a step further. Credit to Fairfield for being able to retain coaches, right? I think that's another piece to this whole puzzle as well, is institutions, once coaches have success, are they able to retain talent at that level as well? So obviously great for the institutions, great for the conference. Those are the stories that we obviously want to promote throughout the season. And as I mentioned earlier with the Amari Monroe story, even better knowing that he had, various offers that he could have easily gone to a Power 4 school and chose to stay at Quinnipiac and within the MAAC. And I thought he said it very eloquently at tip-off of, what that meant to him and what went into that decision, and how competitive this conference was, and being a factor of why he stayed. That every night that he knows he goes out and is going to get every team's best effort. So I think that speaks volumes about him and the competitiveness of this conference as well.
For sure. It's funny how you mentioned the part of retaining coaches. There's so many assistants in this conference who could go on to get, head coaching jobs elsewhere at other universities. It's almost like in the National Football League, you see all the time, the teams that are able to retain the top coordinators in the league are the ones to also have success. So kind of having that, stability in terms of the coaching staff is obviously so important. You talked about the competitiveness. I think that's the bread and butter of the MAAC. And I think what distinguishes it from other conferences is the fact that anybody can beat anybody on any given night. And they were either at the top or towards the top of the MAAC in terms of margin of victory, in terms of how small it was. So how great is that for the game? The fact that how physical it is, how aggressive it is, how anybody can beat anybody. I mean, Mount St. Mary's was a 6th seed and went in the tournament, and they went to the NCAA tournament. So what does that mean? How close these games are and how great the games are in this conference?
And won a game in the NCAA tournament, right? So,
right. Yeah.
An underdog that wins your conference tournament goes to the first 4 and then ends up winning a game in the first round, which is obviously great for them and great for the conference as well. Yeah, I do think that's our bread and butter. That when you are maybe a casual basketball fan out there flipping through your ESPN Plus app, that when you turn on a MAAC basketball game, that 9 times out of 10, you're going to see a very competitive game. And to your point, I think the margin of victory was one of the slimmest in the country last year. So every night is a battle. And I think that's been a good part of our brand. Again, to our earlier conversation about, only taking 10 teams, I think that's only magnified that as well, because you are playing for something. In years past, you might have been an 11, a 12, or a 13, and you knew that you were going to go to the MAAC basketball championship. That's not the case anymore. So I think that just gives that extra drive to not only the coaches, but the student athletes as well, to know that you are playing for a spot in the postseason. If you're not, performing during the regular season, your dreams of going to March Madness are not going to be there.
No, for sure. I thought, I was at a lot of games last year between teams that were just simply fighting for their lives to get into the MAAC tournament. I was there the final game of the regular season for Fairfield U men's basketball, trying to punch their ticket into the MAAC tournament, and I've never seen the place more electric. And so I think it certainly added an extra element to what is already, as you mentioned, a very competitive conference. You talked about how if you're on ESPN Plus and you're flipping through the games, you see a MAAC basketball game, and you're going to want to keep that one on just because of how competitive it is and how great the quality is. What other ways is the MAAC trying to explore kind of its public and national outreach to make sure that people have access to these games and to make sure that they really understand how great this conference can be?
Yeah, so the great thing is we have over 500 events. I would say, last year that number was probably north of 700 plus events on ESPN Plus, and that obviously includes basketball, but Olympic sports as well. Men's, women's lacrosse, volleyball, men's, women's soccer, baseball, softball. So really an opportunity for our schools to have an infomercial every night. I spoke to our ESPN talent last week, and one of the things that we said was during the basketball season, you have over 300 opportunities to promote your institution in terms of games, and that's both on the men's and women's side. So that 2 hour block really matters. How are you using that 2 hours to promote the institution, to promote the conference, to talk about your student athletes, to talk about your academic programs? I think I've really tried to emphasize that people that normally might not watch MAAC games and stumble upon them, they're hopefully going to learn a lot more about your school and the conference through that. We obviously have linear opportunities throughout the year. We've got 4 linear games on the men's side on ESPNU, 1 on the women's side on ESPNU. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I think those are still important on ESPNU, but the landscape of television has changed. So as important as linear is, I think the power of the phone is also just as important, where you can access anything from your fingertips. So that's obviously the biggest way. We're having conversations right now of looking at other maybe local and regional opportunities that are out there for MAAC basketball and our Olympic sports as well. So I think we're just trying to uncover all of the different areas that we can help promote our schools and the conference. A lot of that will be part of our branding project that we're going to be doing this year as well. So as we not only extended our deal with ESPN, now I think part 2 of that, in my opinion, is how do we look at our brand and how do we get that out there more?
Right.
There's a lot of brand confusion with our name, so that's the next project that we're currently tackling as well.
Yeah, I mean, just anything you really want to touch on about like anything that's really in the works. You mentioned some of the branding. Anything else that you feel like is important that fans should know is coming in the MAAC conference?
I would say that's the biggest thing. We're currently well underway in that project. As I mentioned, just a lot of brand confusion. As you look at our logo, I'm looking at it here in the right-hand corner
Yeah.
of the screen, that, and I kind of had this, epiphany the other day, that as you look at our logo, we expect everybody to pronounce it as MAAC. Not MAAC. So there's confusion. Number one is the common person will look at that and say MAAC like they would the SEC, the ACC, the NEC, whoever
Sure.
has those acronyms. So I think that's confusion number one. We're constantly explaining that we're not the MAAC that has football. We're the other MAAC. We're the MAAC with 2 A's. And that puts you on your back heels when you're trying to describe to somebody about your conference. So I'm really excited about this project. We've got a good committee put together that is going to really dig into this over the course of the year and really help transform and reposition the way that we look going forward. And we're very careful not to call this a rebrand or a refresh. It really is a repositioning of the MAAC and our brand and how we signify ourselves out there to the media, the fans, prospective student athletes, everybody from that standpoint.
No, for sure, 100%. And yeah, I mean, sometimes it is, the MAAC, or sometimes it's that. So it's great that you guys are really getting on top of that change. And there's so much you can always work on as a conference. And so little things like that can go a long way in terms of improving the visibility and the national notoriety for this conference. Look, Travis, I got a fun question to wrap things up. Obviously, we're talking about how the game could change. Where's MAAC basketball in 5 years?
Oh, that's a great question. I wish I had a crystal ball. I think as we, this landscape changes minute by minute, and I think over the summer that was very evident as the House settlement went into play. Obviously, with NIL and revenue share at the forefront now, I do think at some point we're going to be talking about national tournament expansion that would have been decided right in 5 years, probably decided here in the next few weeks or so. So that's an element that I think has pros and cons. That gives you the opportunity to potentially have a second bid. Obviously, I know there's a lot that goes into that in terms of scheduling and metrics and what that takes to get a second team in. We were fortunate in the OVC to have and be in that position with Belmont and Murray State. So I've lived that and seen what that can do for a conference. And I think that's a goal that is really that we would try to attain if the tournament does expand. So I think that's something that we need to obviously keep an eye on. From a conference standpoint, 5 years down the road, I think we'll be at a future site, as we mentioned. I know we started the conversation with that. So it's something that I hope that our tournament continues to be a marquee event for this conference, and that that only continues to grow. So as I look over the next 5 years, I really focus on how do we continue to grow our tournament? How do we potentially get a second bid if the tournament does expand? I think those are probably the major two things. And the third is, how do we continue to evolve as this landscape changes? And we talked about retention. We talk about revenue share. What are our schools doing to ensure that they're staying not only at pace, but hopefully a little ahead of the curve as well?
It's certainly going to be an interesting ride over these next 5 years, and even just in this coming season, in the 2025-26 season. Travis Tellitocci, thank you so much. Any final words as we wrap up and, just sit a week away from college basketball season?
No, I appreciate the time, appreciate your enthusiasm for the MAAC and all that you do to cover the league as well. So we hope to see you out at some games throughout the year, and obviously in Atlantic City at our tournament.
Of course, I'll certainly be there. We're, excited to again have another season of coverage of MAAC basketball here on Chase's Sports News. We're going to wrap things up here. Thank you guys so much for making it to the end of the episode alongside the commissioner of the MAAC conference, and Travis Tellitocci. I'm your host, Chase Coburn, saying so long from Chase's Sports News. Take care.